just understanding terms and whatnot. So, well, yeah, capnometer, capnometry, capnography, capnograph, capnogram, end tidal CO2, partial pressure end tidal CO2, PaCO2. So we'll talk a little bit more here as we're going along. So understand it's qualitative and quantitative. Obviously, quantity, we're seeing one to the next. Quality, we're actually getting a measurement. That's all we're trying to do there. So here's our colorimetric device. All it is, by the way, is just a piece of litmus paper. You breathe in and out, and it goes from purple to gold if we're actually exchanging. The thing about with a lot of these, either capnographs or colorimetrics, you've got to have at least 6 breaths before we can actually call this a legitimate reading. So here's our capnometer, the actual numeric reading. Again, we're kind of sitting here saying like, oh, you've got an end tidal of 32. Versus the capnogram, now we're actually watching an actual waveform being displayed. Then, of course, we get a numeric. Of course, we've got a measurement here of our numerical reading. So with capnography, again, we have numerical representation and monitors a waveform and so forth. This came out probably about 8 years ago. I want to say about 8 years ago. And this was actually, all this actually came from was a bunch of anesthesiologists. And because they've been using it all the time. So they said, well, they started doing this, watching these waves, and they said, well, can we decipher anything out of these waves, or is any of this useful? So they started doing a lot of this research, and that's where a lot of this actually comes from. So they took this and said, well, what if you guys could do it out in the field? Because that's how one of the ways we're verifying this, and so we've got all these waves and patterns that we've identified. Take this, apply it there, so you can tell when you're intubated or not. So we all know where CO2 comes from, right? It's a cellular byproduct. All the business. Why is it important? Cells are working. And obviously pH, whether you're acidic or alkalotic at that point. But anyway, the only thing we're going to do here is we're going to kind of look at the height and shape of this form. That's all we're going to do. And this is kind of what we want to see. Just, very little slant and, so forth. But anyway, this kind of works a little bit backwards, okay? This is expiration here, okay? This is your larger airways, dead spaces, blasting out all of its air. Then when we actually go to the plateau, this is all your smaller airways catching up. So that's why you got big, and then that's why you got this little slant that's kind of working right here.
Right there.
Yeah.
Well, because it's measuring CO2, so makes sense.
Yeah. Now this is actually inspiration. So just remember that back line here is inspiration. But we're more concerned about those first 2 waveforms more than anything. If you ever see anybody who's like real heavily sedated, then you'll see this waveform get really, slurred here because they're taking a lot longer to inhale. So we talked about this. So anyway, 5% of CO2 is eliminated through exhalation. The rest is recycled through the body, depending on what it is. Heart and lungs would have to work 10 times faster if they wanted to acquire all the immense CO2 the body produces. Big thing here is understand the ranges. We want 35 to 45, okay? Basically, if this is end tidal CO2, but if you actually look, what is it, the actual PCO2?
33, 40. Like 33 to 40.
It's just the same numbers, really. It's like the pH, for example, 7.35 to 7.45. We're trying to stay in those same ranges. It's the same ranges, relatively the same ranges. So just kind of remember that. But the idea is, so I'm going to kind of move through here. Big thing, I'm going to kind of jump a little bit. Actually, I know, we'll just wait till we get there. Anyway, the thing is, they want to talk about, the different types of shunting, or, what is making the air come out slower or faster, or why are we getting more CO2, or why are we getting less CO2? And like I said, that's kind of since we're kind of looking at troubleshooting at that point. So again, for elevated CO2, obviously, something's cooking along. Something is making this, we're burning some up somehow. So metabolism, hyperthermia, malignant, hypothermia, shivering. Again, we're burning, the cells are working. Respiratory system, either one, it's been depressed, or we've got some kind of disease process where it's just retaining in there. Circulatory-wise, again, this is more constant with the ventilation issues. And of course, when in doubt, look for defective equipment issues, or whatever the case may be. Maybe somebody thought it'd be funny to hook up a soda can of soda to what you're doing and see if we can get a reading from that. The decreases, hypothermia, sedation. Again, like I said, you're not metabolizing. As far respiratory-wise, a spasm and mucus plugging because we're not letting it out. Even if we're ventilating, because the idea is we're ventilating, and then we're like, wait a minute, what are we getting coming out? Whatever the case may be. Ideally, if they're breathing, we're still, what are we getting out? But if we're having a decrease, like I said, why are we getting a decrease? And like here's, like I said, alveolar hyperventilation, again, kind of goes with the bronchospasms, usually kind of hand in hand at that point. Circulatory, like I said, cardiac arrest, obviously. Off cardiac, we're not doing anything, right? So, embolism, obviously it drops you, it kills you. Sudden hypovolemia, no carrying capacity of blood cells. And of course, equipment-wise, leak in the airway, obstruction, ET in the hypopharynx, and so forth.
We're talking about the decrease or the increase. It's what's coming out, what it's showing on the detector.
Yeah.
If you have a decrease coming out, you have an increase in.
Yes. Yes. It's a complete.
I just wanted to make sure I was reading it.
Yeah,
right.
it's a totally inverse relationship.
Yeah.
So the big thing here is understand the first two segments here are normal form. Okay, that's what we want to see, and they're trying to understand, well, what's happening afterwards? Okay, why are we doing this and all of a sudden nothing? Why did we have that big of a drop?
Things blocking for feeding.
Something. I mean, we're just.
You're blowing off too, or you're not blowing off enough, so you're retaining too much. See if they're
Keep going.
They're not
Yeah.
exhaling?
Yeah.
If they're not breathing, or something got disconnected. So, you're breathing. We got the esophagus disconnected from the ventilator, malfunction, obstruction. Again, it's just identification of stuff like this. It's like, okay, you're breathing. We got good waveforms. Now we got nothing. How did we go from something to nothing that quickly? And that's what they're trying to get here, is just being, what went wrong? So. What do you think's going on here?
blowing off too much.
Yeah. What else? No.
No.
More like COPD or something like that, maybe?
You're getting close. If we kind of look at this, my little mouse here. Okay, this is obviously, right here is our large airways, right? This big thing, and then right here. So this is all of our small airways. So this stuff is fighting to get its way out. Okay, that's the kind of want to point out here. Here's your large, here's your small, fighting it out, and then here's your in. So this is bronchospasm. So, any kind of bronchoconstriction from whatever cause may be. The other one is, incomplete airway obstruction, king tube, so forth, so the case may be. But like I said, for whatever reason, like I said, this is kind of that red mark of the lower airways. For whatever there's issue going on, the lower airways are fighting to get air out. It's straining its way out.
So that can be either like a constriction problem or like it says COPD. Like, could that be someone
It's both.
providing their own pee?
It's both constriction. It's both vasoconstriction. Remember, so asthma and COPD can both have the bronchoconstriction. So.
I mean, if somebody has COPD and they're producing that pursed lips and everything, does that all show up? Because you're still prolonging that to try to get. Or am I wrong?
That's a good question.
First one in 3 semesters. I mean, I was just saying. It's like,
No, I mean it really is, because it's like, wait a minute. Well, how would it come out? Because if that person's really managing it on the way out.
I mean, it almost would seem like it would be a flat, like almost flat low. Like,
Or just a constant.
I mean,
I don't
never
know.
get to that 30 to 40. You'd be right under that line and then go back like
Yeah.
bumps or something.
I'd be curious. I'd be really good to find out. I mean, really, because that kind of.
So can you explain this little graph again? Because
These are
So
large.
that's the large airways.
Yep.
So that's the breathing out right there,
This is the large airway coming out.
coming out.
Now we transition to the smaller airways, and they're straining its way out. This is one of the big things that they are pointing
So
out.
they're really,
No, they're going large airways. All the dead space cleared itself out. Now the small airways are trying to push air out. It doesn't have an open. They're all
Okay.
working its way
So-
intermittently.
the numbers on the side is the pressure? No,
That's your end tidal.
That's your, okay.
The amount of CO2.
So we got about, what, 55? That's coming out because it's being retained in there. Think of this, the bronchospasms. It's not all going to come out uniformly. And that's why you hear the whistling. It's trying to work its way out, but it's all at different intervals. It's fighting its way through.
I guess I'm confused by it too. Wouldn't COPD cause a buildup of CO2?
Yeah.
Then why is it so much coming out? Wasn't that COPD?
Yeah.
But there's a large number coming out.
Yeah, a lot of it's being retained in there. Like with bronchospasm, all that air gets trapped in. It's
Okay.
not being allowed out. So, but it's being forced out. It's, like I said, it strains its way out. That make sense?
But it's still not getting all of it out.
It's getting what it can out. It may not be getting all of it out, but that's the whole point. It's like I said, all this stuff here is, air and CO2 trapped in the smaller airways. And like I said, they're trying to fight its way out through very narrow passages. And that's why I said it's retained. That's why you got the high number. It's been sitting there for a while. Oxygen went in, CO2 is just not coming out. It's just been sitting there.
It is now.
Yeah, it is now, but like I said, it's just building up. We don't have a good conductile system to make everything flushed out. What's up with this one?
My thought was like maybe oxidation
Less
or
inhalation, less exhalation.
benzo overdose or some kind of
Yeah.
respiratory depression.
Yeah, I mean, whatever the case may be, I mean, they're breathing less. I mean, they're taking breaths seem to be routine, but it seems they're getting longer and less. So, again, like I said, we're not offloading because that's all we're measuring is just offloading. So, hypotension, massive blood loss. Basically, we're not offloading for whatever the case may be. That makes sense?
A more gradual respiratory
It's fast. We got more of these.
Yeah, they're getting shorter and closer to
So yeah, this is kind of more your hypervent because now we're not kicking out as much. So now let's, so sedation too. We're not taking it.
Hyperventilating, you're not kicking out as much.
Well, you're.
And it's building up.
It can't. The thing is, they're trying to say it's just the CO2 is not making its way out. You're,
Shorter exhalation.
yeah, we're just doing that. It's just kind of going back and forth in here. Makes sense?
That's because you're blowing off, and then you don't have as much in you to keep blowing off. I mean, you're blowing off so fast, you don't have enough to build up
Yeah.
to keep blowing
Well, that's
off.
why
Yeah.
it's getting shorter
Yeah.
and closer together.
Yes.
Because you don't have that reserve to the larger airway. Like when it gets shorter in height, is because your airways, you don't have that to just push out because you're breathing so fast.
Yeah. We've already kicked out a whole lot of it already. Make sense? But yeah, sedation too. Sedate somebody, obviously they're going to breathe less, and obviously they're not going to breathe as deep, so you're not going to get that tidal volume to kick out either. And of course, decrease cardiac output.
sudden stop in expiration?
You're close.
It's like,
Like
a,
a,
it's like your
like a,
your
like a nerve
expiring, but then
problem,
you
like a-
inspire and then expire.
like
You have to.
a reflex.
Yeah. Yeah, requiring from neuromuscular blockade. You're trying to breathe on your own again. That's all that is. So, gradual rise. Actually, one thing that you'll see is, well, one thing they did find out, if you have cardiac arrest and they have like an end tidal of like less than 15, they pretty much say you won't come back.
You're just too acidotic at that point.
Yeah, you're too far gone. You know, nothing's working at that point. The other thing they found out is doing cardiac arrest, let's say you have like an end tidal of like 25, this, that, and the other, all of a sudden you'll see a spike come up. After that, pulses will actually start coming. That's kind of because the cell, everything's starting to work again. Now we just get the pump is trying to follow its way, catch its way up. We actually feel a systemic pressure. So. The idea is, one of the big things I always want to point out is the bronchospasm ones. And like I said, if it's low, like I said, it's something's not, why are you not offloading?
See, that's like the COPD with the pursed lips. Kind of look
Yeah, it's
like
kind of
just
like-
this tenuous blowing.
Yeah. So yeah, this would be kind of like this looks screams equipment problem right there. That's all. I wouldn't be concerned about bronchospasm if you're doing all this kind of erratic behavior. So again, we unusual buildup. Release of tourniquet around a limb. Obviously, if you're occluding, you've got a lot of acidosis that's been building up, and then when you let it flow through, that's how it's offloading. So it's just the big thing with this right now is just get familiar with how the waves work. Don't worry about to identify them 100%. I mean, you want to be able to sit there and say, well, if I'm offloading a lot of CO2, what's my waveform going to be? It's going to be high. If I'm not, it's going to be low. If I'm having respiratory depression and I start ventilating, what should I expect to see? That's the kind of stuff you really kind of want to get out of it. This gets into a lot more detail than we're probably going to utilize. But like I said, it's just more or less, do you understand the concept behind all this?
I understand that it's bad to have CO2 buildup.
Yeah.
What's the problem with getting rid of too much CO2?
You gotta have that balance. of
Yeah,
oxygen.
you got to have that 1 to 20 balance of bicarbonate to hydrogen. That's why.
When you go alkaline, you can't offload.
That's what I was saying about they get hyperpolarized and you start having speedal spasms and spasming around your mouth and so forth. But the thing is, like I said, if you're kicking off a lot of CO2, why are you doing it? If you're not kicking off a lot of CO2, why are you not doing it? As far as patterns are concerned, the only ones they ever really pick up is, like I said, the bronchospasms. If you see somebody waking up from neuromuscular blockade, it'll be like, hey, that's kind of neat to see. Move along in life. But understand what causes. I think
If
what.
they've not been breathing for a while, you put that on them, it's going to be really high at first, right? 'Cause
When we
they're
start
not
ventilating,
gonna-
yeah, we should be.
Will it eventually kind of...
Eventually, if we're ventilating for them, yes, it should tick up really high, and then it should regulate back to normal. If that's the only issue, is respiratory depression. If that's the only issue.
Right.
If it's a metabolic issue, we'll probably just have high
And
CO2.
mismatch somewhere else down.
Well, like I said, if it's a metabolic issue and it's just, they're sick, they're septic, we might just have high CO2 the entire time. It kind of makes sense?
It does.
What confuses me, Jason, is if you have PaCO2, it's 35 to 45.
Okay.
So you go by that number. If you're above 45, that means you have more CO2.
Yeah.
Coming
If you
out.
have more CO2,
Okay.
then does that mean you're acidotic?
Okay. Let me stop real quick.